Okay, thank you for inviting me or allowing me to join you virtually. It's a great pleasure, and it was very interesting to hear this session. Let me just say that my whole interest, to the extent I have had an interest in this field, is thanks to my association with Laureate Academy. It was through and and financial and the Laureate Academy that I got interested in this sometime in 2018, and have friends there, several friends, especially Long and Yi and Sixia and so on. So it's great to see you all. My comments. Somebody's talking. Sorry. So let me preface by saying in no way am I an expertise on this, but I have thoughts and I will share them with you. The first, well, let me say one thing about China, which was so fascinating for me in the beginning, was that the speed with which, how advanced it was, in 2008, I think it was in January, seeing what Ant Financial was doing and so on. It was so ahead, say, relative to Europe, but also in many ways ahead of the US. And especially the payment system and the ecosystems and the platforms that you had. And every time I've been there since, there has been great leaps of new ideas. And the point I want to make is that one reason China could do that, in some sense, it wasn't destined to do that, but it could do that, was because it doesn't have legacy assets, or didn't have legacy assets. And this burden of legacy assets is holding back Europe especially. The US has its own way of dealing with legacy assets. It's a very strong financial market that kills sunset industries, and also a very vibrant startup market where new sunrise projects are born. But Europe is lacking both of these ends, and I think it's working like. But in the end, Europe doesn't have a single platform company, just to give an example, and so generating data is harder for them. So it's more challenging. Europe is, of course, not a country either, so one has to understand that. So let me comment on some of these the talks I just listened to. The first talk was by Hao Wang. I hope I get it right. And he gave a very interesting, it was sort of a wonderful thing to see how we are moving into new fields. We have heard about Fintech a lot, but this was about insurance. The possibilities in insurance are enormous in terms of both private, which I understood the talk to be about, but also public insurance, and how efficiencies may be reaped from using AI at all levels. At the same time, health, insurance, especially health insurance, is a tremendously complicated area, and of course all countries are struggling with it. It looks like one should be able to simplify it quickly, but it's not that way. But this talk was giving a number of examples where progress had been made. I didn't understand all the details, but I think there's claims handling and so on that was emphasized. Just a lot of processing, and of course also aggregating data so that one could learn from it for the benefit of everybody. I did not understand the answer to a question that was raised, which was, what about adverse selection, and how big an issue could it be? But I leave it at that. Let me just emphasize that, or mention that Europe, one of the very good, I think, regulations in Europe is the open banking that was just mentioned by Wei. Open banking has been really successful, I think. And it's going to move into what one might call open insurance, or in the same vein that, that information will be shared, especially in health insurance. And I think that regulatory structure that's behind the open banking is transport. There are committees working on it now, but it's going to be possible to share. And I don't know, it would have been interesting to hear how China is using this sort of sharing of information. It came up a little bit in the free rider discussion just before I started talking. But those are of course deep issues. The deep issue is, how do we take advantage of this tremendous common resource called data, and share it in a way that gives incentives both for generating data and also for sharing data and not abusing it and so on. So these are really core issues, and we'll have a lot to work on for a long time. Zixia, who is as I mentioned, is another friend from old days, Zixia was the first one who really taught me how this platform business works in a sort of deeper way. This, especially the push lending, as he called it. The New Hope is something I've heard Zixia talk about, so I knew about it from before. I remember from the old days, I was fascinated by how the boundaries of firms, and in particular New Hope, was driven by data needs, as opposed to, are we in the same industry, and therefore, and the implications this has, for instance, on regulation is fascinating. He didn't talk about it today, but I just want to mention that New Hope, going into places where they really didn't have the business to be, except for the fact that they generate data. I remember the restaurants, going to restaurant businesses, not because it was interesting to serve customers per se, but because business restaurants were giving really early signals about where the world was heading, or what was happening on the economic side. It's a very, very fast reacting business, apparently. The thing that in today's talk stuck with me was this notion of being proactive and pushing, not waiting for the customer to come to you, but actually pushing ideas. Of course, that has been an old idea, but basically taking a comprehensive and dynamic approach and offering to the customers, something more than they even imagined they existed. So anticipating their needs and seeing this long-term effect, and then also structuring the portfolio of customers, I thought all that was very interesting, and obviously has been a very big part of Zixia's work at New Hope. And again, I'm coming back to the idea of open banking, but I didn't hear anything about it, so I don't want to dwell on it. Fan Zhang, I think, was the next speaker. Private company, I assume, on large language models. This, I should say that he touched on something that is really a big battle right now in the US, which is, how open can these large language models be? Open AI is actually not at all open. So by open, I mean people have access. So really, Meta is the one that really offers the most used open model. And I've seen at Stanford when I visited them, how they use it to create application layers and use it for small models, which was part of the talk by Fan Zhang. If that window isn't kept open, it's really going to be bad times. Now, some people say, like Young Lagoon or something like that, thinks it will have to get, it's just going to become more and more open. These large language models, it's not going to stay proprietary, but it's not obvious. And Susan Athey, who some of you know, or most of you probably know, she's actually fighting very hard in the in Washington to keep these new regulations that are coming, making sure that they allow for openness, sufficient openness for the application layers. So that's very important, and EU especially, is going to be very dependent on staying open. They regulate a lot of things, I think, way too much at this early stage of the developments, but they are all about B2B. They are all about the small models that I think Fan Zhang was talking about, and they are strong in sort of the consulting side of the business, meaning consulting, helping companies learn about how to use AI, but they are nowhere in sight in the sort of B2C space, which also generates a lot of important data. And so one thing that I really liked from Fan Zhang's talk was this emphasis that thinking about what the data is really used for. This is sort of a consulting. We are in the mode of thinking that everything, it's going to just be all wonderful, but it's clear that there's going to be much more refined view, so that it will require a lot of human thinking about what will be the right kinds of small models that will really unlock, these potential resources for the companies. Actually, companies, the developments on the company side is very weak, and if you really go and look at, surveys of how much companies use AI, it's actually very small, according to some of these findings, at least. Maybe 5% or 10% do it in any serious way. So companies are really struggling still of understanding what should all this be good for. And it reminds me, I started actually as a regular worker. That is, I worked for a big company, and at a time where linear programming and these sort of OR tools came into life, and the belief was that soon we will have just these computers crunch out plans for the companies, and they sort of will just sit back and implement them. I mean, of course, nothing like that happened, and the whole dream about this automation coming into companies for strategic benefit disappeared pretty quickly. So it may be that I think it's entirely safe to say we have no idea what these things are really going to be used for in another 5 years or so. We can think about it this way, and we will worry about this, but my guess is that eventually it's going to find its applications in a way that we can't even imagine right now. That's at least what happened to this wave of operations research and so on. None of these dreams about big models that can run companies ever came close to fruition, and the same I think is likely to be true in this space. Also, on the academic side, the reason I was more interested in the practitioners' talk was that basically it was easier to understand. I didn't have access to these papers, and these theories are hard to absorb immediately. But one of the waste paper I thought was that tradition I know because I was studying what's happened to the lending business and these models being used. I thought this was another very interesting addition to that long line of research that has happened in China, and I have been taking part of the non-collateralized lending. Information is becoming the new collateral, and kind of upending the old idea that information is expensive, and therefore collateral is a way of getting around the costly information that we need for lending. We ended up in some places the reverse. That is, the information is actually the cheap part because it's a side product of these platforms, and therefore can be used more inexpensively and draw on these powerful especially I guess AI, but machine learning models to create an entirely new type of lending. The interesting thing, it came up, I think, in that data again, that the sort of the information-based lending has stability properties that are different from the collateral-based lending. since collateral is mostly real estate, it is very sensitive to the real estate business. And I know that's a paper I think E and Wei and others have been working on. I think that's a very interesting observation, that it's much more stable. And in that sense, it can smooth out, some of the cyclical effects of real estate. And I assume that was also in this paper. Professor Bernard Young, he talked about the changes in collateral law being more important than bankruptcy law. I'm not sure I quite understand what it is, but I do take issue with one of his recommendations is, or the way it was talked about, that we are just going to, why don't we just auction off, assets when a company ends up in bankruptcy or in difficulties. And that's always a very tempting idea, why don't we just sell it? But of course, we know from bankruptcy, those studies of bankruptcy and the lawyers that are involved in bankruptcy, that it's an immensely complicated thing, because there's so much, so much asymmetric information eventually. Not much information was produced when everything was going well, and then you get suddenly thrown into a situation where you have to find out what are these collaterals after all worth. Because we worked on the idea that there's just enough for collateral. But now suddenly there isn't enough, so now we have to look at what are they exactly worth and who can get it and so on and so forth. And that's just, there is no real shortcuts in most cases for those. It depends a little on context, but on the whole, and throwing it into an auction tends to not be the solution. Because then all these asymmetries of information really come into display. So I'm skeptical, or at least let me put it more mildly. Some things can be really handled like that. But I definitely don't think there's going to be anytime soon a situation where this kind of auction will be the solution to this particular case. So those are, I don't want to comment on the last theory papers because they get into details that isn't suitable for what I'm saying. But the big takeaways for me are there are massive opportunities, here. The question is, how are we going to take advantage of the fact that we suddenly have these trillions of dollars of value created by data? We have learned that we can use this data, but how are we going to share the fruits of those? How are we going to protect against the abuse of those assets and so on? And all that is really quite open. And it's going to require a lot of human thinking to actually get through to a point where we can actually enjoy the benefits and not worry too much about the problems that everybody are talking about right now. An interesting question is, we are probably never going to understand exactly what's going on in these AI models. So one of the things is how much can we do, especially on the science side, and if we are starting to run models, on the science side, to figure out sort of new things about the world. How much can we do that without understanding really the generation of data? And I'm saying this especially as a theorist. I'm used to understand. I always emphasize you need to understand your model. Otherwise, this theory is not really very valuable. The model needs to be simple for that reason, and so on. All these sort of beliefs may be challenged by this AI revolution. So I think I'm glad I'm 75 years old and not younger. In that I enjoyed the life. I enjoyed life when we could really understand our models. But I think we are headed for an era where we are going to be more challenged to understand what's happening. Thank you very much.